Hello, and thank you for watching. My name is Bradford Roberts, Principal Broker, Founder, and Owner of TR Realty in the Las Vegas area. After watching this video, please be sure to like it as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel. Download the pertinent handouts for this video by clicking the link in the comments below. Now let's get started. This video is entitled Class 4 Seller Excellence, and this segment is entitled Listing Strategies. So the first question I need you to ask yourself is, how many listings have you had? Because if you don't list, you don't last. Today's class is pretty important because if you're serious about real estate as a long-term career, you have to pursue listings regardless of market conditions. Listings are the heart and soul of the real estate business. And if you're struggling, it's probably because you don't have too many listings. Once we get a listing, we hold on to it and we don't let it go. Listings are very valuable, especially in the era of OfferPad and Purplebricks and Opendoor and Rex and those kinds of companies. They are trying to take listings away from the traditional real estate professional. Listings are a magnet for additional business. When you have listings, watch your business really take off. Listings give you great marketing and lead opportunities, places to put signs and do open houses, postcard material, online marketing, websites, social media, and so much more. You should always have current and accurate information for the neighborhood that surrounds your listing, because invariably you're going to get inquiries from the public and something about your listing is not to their liking. It doesn't have enough bedrooms, it has too many bathrooms, it has a pool or doesn't have a pool, it faces the wrong way, it's not feng shui compliant, the view is wrong, whatever. And those opportunities are leads for you. As the listing agent on the property, you need to take those inquiries and turn them into buyer leads for other properties. So I highly recommend that you set up a saved search, or a hot sheet it's sometimes called, so that you can be kept up to date on everything that's happening in the neighborhood. When a new listing comes on the market, that is your competition. When a listing down the street is under contract, that means that yours is moving up in the search ranking. So we need to know exactly what's going on around our listing every time. Buyers and renters can be great sources of listings because they typically start looking for a place to go before they put their current property on the market. That's why we should always be asking our buyers and our renters if they have a property that they need to dispose of. You would be the first agent on the scene if you ask that question. Rental listings can become sale listings either now or in the future, so don't turn them down. There's a common myth that you have to be a permitted property manager in order to list a property for rent. That is absolutely not the case. With a regular real estate license in the state of Nevada, you can list a property for rent. We do refer to that as a courtesy listing in our industry. A courtesy listing is a rental listing by a non-property manager. Whenever you have the opportunity to take a new listing, you should always check MLS. It's possible that the listing that you're being asked to take is already listed by another broker. Now, how could that happen? Well, one way is people just don't understand what they're signing. They don't understand the nature of our relationship is one of exclusivity. So they might have their property listed with a broker down the street and then turn to you to list the property, again, not understanding what they signed with the other broker. Or there are cases where they think that their relationship with the other broker has terminated. Perhaps the agreement has expired, or maybe they sent an email trying to cancel it. They don't understand that cancellation would require bilateral consent. So one of the things we need to do is check MLS right now before we invest time and effort into the paperwork or making an appointment to make sure that property is not currently listed. And while we're there in MLS, we also want to check status H. And status H refers to the history of the property. It's probably good information for you to know if the property was listed until yesterday with another broker at X amount of money, and now the seller is calling you in to list the property and wanting even more than they listed with the last broker. Don't you think that's something that you would probably want to know? Don't you think you would want to know if they've listed with 3 brokers in the last 2 months? Maybe something is going on there, right? So we always want to check status H. That brings me to an important discussion about a legal concept known as tortious interference. Tortious, if you're not familiar with the word, is spelled Tortious. And tortious refers to tort, which is civil law. Tortious interference is defined as the causing of harm by disrupting something that belongs to someone else. So this is kind of like trespassing on someone's legal rights. In our industry, tortious interference usually takes the form of one agent interfering with a legally binding contract that exists with another broker. So this is one of the reasons a couple of minutes ago I said we need to check MLS to see if that property is listed. If you were to take progressive action to sign a listing and put that listing on the market, and that property was already listed with another broker, you might be charged with and found guilty of tortious interference. So it is absolutely critical that as real estate professionals, we never ever interfere with a legal binding contract that exists with another broker. Of course, we can never disparage that other broker in any way. We can never induce or suggest or assist in any type of cancellation. It is part of our realtor pledge as well that we respect the contracts that exist with other brokers. So be very careful not to engage in tortious interference. It is important that we check the tax records before we list a property also, to ensure that the person who's asking us to list the property is actually the owner, not a relative, not a representative. And we can't list a property that someone doesn't own yet. In other words, they might have it in escrow, they're closing escrow soon, they'd like to flip that property. So we can only list a property with the seller who legally owns that property. I want to talk a little bit about the for sale by owner strategy that some people are determined to employ. One of the reasons I mention this now in my listing class is because you're going to meet with sellers, some of whom do not hire you. Either they're going to go with another broker, or in some cases, they only meet with real estate professionals to pick their brains, to get an idea of value, to ask about paperwork, maybe to ask about marketing strategies, those kinds of things, so they can turn around and attempt to sell the property for sale by owner. Now, there are some brokers who suggest to their agents that they should be cold calling FSBOs, buying lists of FSBOs to try to bring those in as listings. Honestly, it's something that I never did in my career. When I started my sales career 1,000 years ago, I saw other agents in the office soliciting FSBOs, and I could tell you it typically didn't go very well for them. FSBOs are tough listings. These are people who have already decided, for whatever reason, that they don't see the value in hiring us. So even if through your amazing salesmanship, you are somehow able to convince them to stop the FSBO process and to list with us, trust me, it's going to be a very, very tough listing. FSBOs make up today about 8% of the residential transactions in Southern Nevada, down from a peak of 21% back in the 1980s. FSBOs are now averaging about a 20% lower sale price than agent-assisted properties. FSBOs are now sitting on the market approximately 19 days longer than the average agent-assisted property. And of course, when you're holding a property longer than you intended to, you're incurring costs, perhaps mortgage interest costs, association fees, taxes, insurances, utilities, maintenance, landscaping, those sorts of things. And here's an interesting statistic that I wanted to share with you today. 10,000 for sale by owner principals were surveyed and asked a very simple question. Would you try it again? 69% of those surveyed said they would not try a for sale by owner transaction again. Next thing I want to talk to you about today is the relatively new, or so it seems, concept known as iBuyers. The letter I, buyers. And most people come to the conclusion that iBuyers means internet buyers. Actually, iBuyer does not stand for internet buyer at all. It stands for instant buyer. And I know that today we have all this technology and all these new companies coming into the market. Companies like Zillow, Opendoor, Rex, Purple Bricks, OfferPad. These companies have recently employed technology to get through most of the process. But in reality, this concept has been around for decades. Some of you watching this video right now might remember that there used to be signs all over southern Nevada about some company buying ugly houses. Do you remember that? Well, those were the original iBuyers. Those companies would come in, they would make a lowball offer. They didn't require the seller to invest money in repairs or anything like that. They would buy the property as cheaply as they could. They had a construction crew to come in and do what was required to be done on the property, and they would turn around and that property would be back on the market within a few days or a couple of weeks or so. These companies that we call iBuyers today will typically make their offers sight unseen. And that's because they have quite sophisticated computer models to assist them with valuation, repair costs, and that sort of thing. Typically, the offers that you receive from an iBuyer are non-negotiable. They usually come in quick, they're usually low. But if you are listing a property with a seller who is maybe desperate, or maybe if the house is not in good condition and it wouldn't qualify for financing, maybe your seller might wish to consider an iBuyer. But it's amazing how the technology has changed, but the concept is something that has been around for a long, long time. And that brings me to discussing the concept of listing a property for sale as is. Chances are you're going to encounter a lot of sellers who tell you they don't want to spend money or they can't spend money on repairs. They want to sell their property as is. I want to talk to you a little bit about the strategy of handling that as a real estate professional. If you list a property for $200,000 and a buyer comes along and writes an offer, can the seller counteroffer at $205,000? Absolutely, right? Seller can counteroffer anything he wants. Why do I mention that to you? Because it is my opinion that the best way to handle a seller who wants to sell his property as is not to advertise the property as is, but to end up as is through the counteroffer process. What am I talking about? If we put a property on the market as is, traditional thinking is that there's something wrong with it. And I think if you put your property in MLS or you put it on your social media or wherever and you say as is, you are going to scare away a good chunk of buyers. Now, maybe there's nothing wrong with the property at all, but just the phrase as is off-putting to a lot of people. So, my opinion, we don't list the property as is so that we don't reduce the buyer pool. We save the as-is provision for the counteroffer process. It becomes a negotiating strategy. Before we list a condo, we have another thing to do, and that is to find out if that condominium development is approved for FHA financing. That list of condominium communities that can be financed changes all the time. And it's smart to check with our lender and find out if that community is FHA approved before you've got egg all over your face and you waste a lot of your seller's valuable time by putting that condo up on the market and saying that you're willing to accept an FHA buyer. As of the filming of this video, there's still actually more condo communities in southern Nevada that are not FHA approved than are. So in other words, a majority would not qualify for FHA financing. Ask a lender before you sign a listing agreement and before you put the property on the market, trying to approach an FHA buyer. Another concept I want to discuss with you here is the strategy of listing a house where there is a tenant in a lease. So the first thing we need to know about this is if there's a tenant with a lease, the lease supersedes the sale. In other words, in the state of Nevada, when we sell a property, the tenant is not just kicked out on the street. The lease will survive the sale of the property. Since FHA buyers and VA buyers require immediate occupancy, that's a critical part of their loan, right? We cannot sell a house to an FHA or VA buyer with a tenant in place. So just like we were saying a minute ago about listing a house with a tenant in a lease, we need to make sure that if we do list a property with a lease in existence, we cannot advertise the property to attract an FHA buyer or a VA buyer. And again, this is something we need to know before we effectuate that listing agreement and before we put that property in MLS. Let's talk a little bit about mobile homes. So, mobile homes can be tricky. A mobile home in and of itself is not real estate, and therefore we are not licensed to sell mobile homes. However, if the owner of the mobile home has the mobile home sitting on land that he owns, the real estate division has carved out this exception for us because their thought is that the sale of the mobile home is ancillary to the sale of the land. Let me say that differently. If you have an opportunity to list a mobile home and the mobile home is sitting on land that is leased or rented, we cannot list it. Actually, as per Nevada law, selling a mobile home is like selling a car. So it's a different license that is required, not a real estate activity at all. But as long as the owner of the mobile home owns the land where the home is sitting, we can sell it ancillary to the sale of the land, just like you are allowed to sell a house that includes furniture, as an example, because we are selling primarily the land. There is a used, manufactured, and mobile home disclosure available to us in Transaction Desk. So if we're going to list and sell a mobile home, we definitely need to use that disclosure. Oh, and I should probably mention the difference between a mobile home and a manufactured home. A mobile home, as the name implies, mobile, is one that was moved or can be moved. Sometimes they take the wheels off of it. It's not easy to move it anymore, but it's still considered a mobile home. A manufactured home is different. A manufactured home is one that was built in pieces in a factory somewhere, shipped to the site, and then assembled on the site. And typically a manufactured home is tied down, meaning it's attached to a foundation and it's attached to the utilities as well, different than a mobile home. Another thing that we need to know before listing a property is that property in distress? And in real estate, when we talk about property being in distress, we are generally talking about a property that has either a notice of default filed against it or perhaps a summons and complaint. Let's talk a little bit about that. You might know from one of my other video classes that Nevada is a non-judicial foreclosure state. In a non-judicial foreclosure state, the lien holder that intends to foreclose on the property can file a non-judicial foreclosure action. And the first step in that entire process is the filing of a notice of default. So if you go to the county recorder's office and you see that a notice of default has been filed against the property, what that's telling you is that the lien holder is intending to foreclose on the property via a non-judicial foreclosure. If you notice something called a summons and complaint, what that tells you is that the lien holder is intending to foreclose on the property via a judicial foreclosure. Non-judicial foreclosures are cheaper, they're quicker, they're simpler for the lender. Why would a lender ever choose a judicial foreclosure? The reason is simple. The state of Nevada has imposed criminal penalties if the non-judicial foreclosure process is done incorrectly. And we're going to be talking a lot more detail about some of the laws in my Class 6 video series, which is all about short sales. But what I want you to know for today's class is that before you list a property, you should be going to the county recorder's office. You should take note if there is a summons and complaint or a notice of default filed against the property. We can still take the listing, but we need to be very mindful of what's going on. Typically what that means is the owner is several payments behind. Time is not our friend anymore. We can't be messing around by listing the property for a high price. We can't be fooling around with showing instructions or trying to reduce commission. We need to get going on this listing. The next thing I want to talk about is known as an AITD, which stands for All-Inclusive Trust Deed. The AITD is very similar to what was called in the 1980s a wraparound mortgage. AITDs are very dangerous for the seller, and in some cases, an AITD actually constitutes mortgage fraud. Stay away from AITDs. We do not touch all-inclusive trust deeds. I recommend that you avoid listings from sellers who are not motivated or not realistic, because you're setting yourself up for failure. Now, I know as a real estate agent how valuable listings are. We talked about that at the beginning of this segment. And I know how eager some of you are to go out there and get a listing. I completely understand that. I sold real estate too. However, if you are working with someone who is not motivated, not realistic about the price or the process, maybe someone who wants to take away your basic tools like a lockbox, a sign, the right to do an open house, internet advertising, the chance to do photos, and those kinds of things, it might feel good for you today to walk out of the meeting with the seller with a listing agreement in your hand, but folks, this is going to come back and haunt you in the future. Remember, when you fail to sell a listing, it creates a permanent record. And a savvy consumer can go online and they can see how many times you've taken a listing and you failed with it, which means you let it expire. We're going to be talking about in the rest of this class for today that the success or failure with your listing starts at the time you take the listing. So it's important that we work with the right sellers, regardless of how eager or, may I say, desperate you might be to go out and take a listing. A lot of agents will avoid showing a property that's been on the market too long. There's just a feeling that the property is getting stale, something is wrong. Maybe it's not very good inside, maybe the seller is unrealistic, maybe he's a difficult negotiator, whatever. So, we talk about these sellers who want to list high and then cut the price later. It's a foolish strategy for sure. We're going to be talking about that in my next video segment, which is setting the price. So I want to talk about the two ways we look at a listing that is sitting on the market. First is if you can't get any showings. If you've got a property listed and you're just not getting any showing activity, something is wrong with the listing itself. Price, the commission that you're offering, maybe there's difficult showing instructions. So no showings tells you something is wrong with the listing itself. However, if you're getting showings, but you're not getting offers, that probably should tell you that something is wrong with the property. Maybe something's wrong with the condition of the property or the neighborhood surrounding the property. Maybe there are staging issues. So for us to be successful with a listing, we have to be able to analyze our failures. No showings, something wrong with what you put in MLS. Showings but no offers, something wrong with the property. And if your listing expires, what that means is it has been rejected by buyers. There's only one reason a house will not sell: price. And you, as the listing agent, are in charge of setting the price. I would like to thank you for watching this video. I hope it was informative for you. If you are licensed with another brokerage in Southern Nevada and would like to talk with me, please text me or visit our website. See you next time.